Alright, Travis Wingoodsell. We'll do the lesson for Sunday, the 13th, so that you can stay home. This starts off Abraham, and unfortunately, the church service missionaries who did the manual are not very smart in regards to the Old Testament. Because Abraham, chapters 1 and 2, explains Genesis chapter 9, which was yesterday's lesson. You didn't cover it in yesterday's lesson because it has to do with Noah began to be an husbandman, and he planted a vineyard, and he drank of the wine and was drunken, and he was uncovered within his tent. And Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father, and told his two brethren without. And Shem and Japheth took a garment, and laid it upon their shoulders, and went backward, and covered the nakedness of their father, and their faces were backward, and they saw not the father's nakedness. And Noah awoke from his wine, and knew what his younger son had done unto him, and he said, Cursed be Canaan. Not a single Jew understands what any of this means. Not a single rabbi. Nobody. People have tried, but nobody knows. It's hilarious. And Joseph Smith comes along. Boom, here it is. Here's why. And the church, instead of telling the world, hey, this is what it means. Nope. Joseph Smith is not a translator. He's a fraud. But he's the founding prophet, and we're true. Why don't you trust your own founder? If you don't trust him, why are you claiming to be his church? You obviously don't believe. So, before we get into that, we need to do some background coming forth into this one. You have Noah, you have Japheth, and Shem, and Ham. Japheth is Yah-Ptah. Yah is the Hebrew god, Ptah is an Egyptian deity. Shem is the name. That's what it means in Hebrew, the name. And so Hashem is often placed in place of Yahweh in Jewish texts when they're copying the Bible. They'll put Hashem, and everybody's supposed to know exactly what that means, what the original word is. And so, when you read from our Doctrine and Covenants, right? Yeah, 107. Let's go to it, rather than trusting in my memory. Why the first is called the Melchizedek Priesthood is because Melchizedek was such a great high priest. Before his day, it was called the Holy Priesthood after the order of the Son of God. But out of respect or reverence to the name of the Supreme Being, and I'll give you a hint, it's not Son, nor Son of God. That's not a name, that's a title. There's a name missing. To avoid the too frequent repetition of his name, they, the church in ancient days, called the priesthood after Melchizedek, or the Melchizedek Priesthood. And I've gone over with you that Isaiah's Amen El, Emmanuel, is Amen, Melchizedek, condensed into 3 letters. The sun symbol at the beginning is the prefix determinative the sun, so sun deity. The M is the Egyptian character from the sign list for a high priest pouring water over his head from a little bucket thing. This is a clay jar. And then the N is both independent and is used as a suffix determinative for a king if it's a person, kingdom if it's a place. It refers to the character with a crown on his head for king or kingdom. And so Amun, king and high priest. Melchizedek, Melech, king, Zadok, high priest. King and high priest, king and high priest. The name of our God in Mormonism, Amun, son Amun. It's in 3 different places. Amun in one of those 3. Adam, Andai, Amun. That's the name of our Christ. He's the sun god. That's the name, the meaning of it. And so when I talk to you about how Joseph Smith in the first vision tells us who our Christ is not, Jesus is not our Christ. That's what he says in the first vision. Then he goes on to the next story. Nephi, not Moroni, trust Joseph. He knows what he's talking about. Nephi tells Joseph who the Christ is. Guess who? Joseph is the Christ. But there's going to be another Mormon, mortal man, mortal parents, who will also be the Christ. Joseph Smith is the cornerstone Christ of Mormonism. There will be a capstone Christ of Mormonism right now, during our day and time. Isn't that great? The prophets all tell you about it rather than telling you about the Christ that isn't our Christ. Right? So 2 Nephi chapter 3 tells us all about how Joseph Smith is the cornerstone Christ and that there will be a future capstone Christ of Mormonism. Right there in your Book of Mormon. You believe the Book of Mormon, right? Book of Mormon is true, right? So you don't dispute this? You study your scriptures, and so you know all these answers, and you're bored already. Oh, I know all this, Travis. Right? Okay. So let's get this out of the way, and let's get back to probably to the Ogdode. So the flood story comes from the Egyptian Ogdode story, as it's called. Ogdode is the Egyptian word for 8. There were 8 people in this flood story, and thus Ogdode. And it's comparative with the biblical story of 8 persons who survive a flood. Now, the Ogdode story is a separate, distinct story from the Egyptian documents. The Egyptians did not have running narrative stories combining different stories into a historical narrative, like a book. That was first accomplished Greeks, Hesiod's Iliad and Odyssey. But the Bible was written during the Roman period of time, both the Old and New Testaments, due to anachronisms, and the Bible took from Egyptian stories that were all separate and distinct stories, combined them together to create a historical narrative. So both the Torah and the Gospels are done after that manner. They are apocalyptic literature told in a historical narrative form. And Constantine is the one who designated the Gospels as actual history rather than apocalyptic literature, when he said that Jesus Christ is a historical character, not an apocalyptic character, which Joseph Smith in the first vision tells us is an abomination. It's not historical. It's not our Christ. He's a type and shadow of who our Christ is, who is Amen. And so Matthew screws it up by naming the Christ hero of the apocalyptic story he's combining together into a single narrative as the reverse name of Isaiah, who he doesn't name. He just calls him the prophet. According to the word of the prophet, his name shall be Emmanuel, and so his name was called Jesus, which is the reverse of Isaiah. Salvation of Yah, Isaiah. Yah of salvation, Jesus. Reversed. And so the Egyptian names involve the four males. Nu is associated with the primordial waters, as his wife Nonet is corresponding to the primordial waters in other stories as Nun. But here the male is Nu, without the extra N at the end. And Egyptian is different than Paleo-Hebrew with Amen. Just so that you know, the N does not correspond with king and kingdom. There are differences. So as you see in the chart that I corrected, they have Ker as the fourth male, and it's actually Amen, because that's the one that the biblical story took. Shem, the name. Amen. So you can see which story they took this from. And so, yes, Noah is new, as we see this in Matthew 24, as in the days of not Noah, in the days of so shall it be in the latter days. So here we have apocalyptic literature with the Ogdode story that is used in the Bible as a historical narrative rather than apocalyptic literature, which I talked to you about for last week's lesson. Or yesterday's lesson. Last week for yesterday's lesson. And you'll notice the water symbol going from right to left, though it's incorrect, sort of. Egyptologists are altering the text to conform to a pattern, and it annoys me. You're supposed to be able to read into the faces, and so the character is at the end as a determinative at the end, but regardless, you see the jars, 3 jars, so plural. That's what multiple or 3 jars represents, or is in plural. And so then you have below it the symbol for the sky. Nut is the sky, the heavens, as she is on top, on her hands and knees, arched for the sky. Well, not the sky, the heavens. And so that's the heavens part. The sky technically is the space between heaven and earth. That Father's shoe is holding her up, separating her from her brother Geb, the earth. But for Nu, he's got the water jars, the sky, and then water in plural. And so you can see high priest is associated with this. Noah is the high priest, and associated with the flood story as the high priest. And I've gone over with you previously how the flood story is just yet a retelling of a creation story. See, Noah is Horus, who is to the latter-day Christ, who's to restore the throne of the deceased, murdered cornerstone Christ. So Joseph was murdered. Guess what? Following the Egyptian pattern, the last day's capstone Christ is to restore the church of Joseph Smith. As Nelson confesses, this is not the church of Joseph Smith. It's Jesus' church, but he doesn't exist as a real person. Nelson, what are you talking about? What are you trying to pull on Mormons? Great Bible Church, who murdered Joseph Smith. And so, today or tomorrow, I have no idea. It's just a scientific test that we're running. If they want to save my life, he better do something about it. And so, it's also Father Shu in that context, the Father who separates heavens from earth, and is the dividing of the waters from the waters, and the dry land appears, which is a creation symbolism, not just for heaven and earth, but for the inundation of the Nile River, as well as childbirth. When the water breaks, out comes the baby. Birthright blessing son, who gets a double portion for the mountain symbols of D for delta in Paleo-Hebrew, or pyramid shapes, for which the double D is the word love for both sexual and nurturing love of babies. And so, yes, that's exactly right. And the two D's put together become the sun symbol of King David, who likewise has the two D's in his name, and is the Tawut of the Egyptian dynasty, Tawut Mose 18th dynasty, which ties back to the origins with Osiris, Set, and Horus, and even earlier back to Nut and Geb being divided by Shu, as David thought, again all phonetically the same, T and D's, who adds 5 days to the calendar so that the 5 children could be born of Nut, and thus came Osiris and Set, who murdered him, who took his throne, and then Horus comes later. So Noah is Horus, the restoring prophet. But to have a flood again just continues the cycle. Now Noah is the father character rather than the son character, and so you have the 3 brothers involved, and so it's a different scenario of usurping the birthright and blessing, as we're now getting into Abraham for this coming Sunday, who usurps the birthright and blessing from Pharaoh. But you have the 3 others of the Ogdode. Ammon, well, that's Shem. You have Kekui, and it's pronounced differently depending on the text, but Ham is Kem, and Kem with the feminine from the Egyptian, et, depending on the spelling as you see, the T at the end. And can you guess which ones are the females? And what the symbol at the suffix determinative recognizes the female? It's not just the female who is sitting down. It's also the bread loaf and the egg. And so that identifies a female as understood by the Egyptians, where just a guy with a little beard thing is identified as male. And so Kekui, or Kekuit, is Kem and Kemet, Ham and his wife. And his wife, being Hamet, Kemet, is also the word for the land of Egypt. Kemet. There's an archaeological scientific magazine called Kemet, having to do with Egypt. And that's what is translated as the black land, because of the black soil. It's red soil that gets washed down during the flooding, so that the waters appear as if they're blood red. Sound familiar with Moses? Yeah. So the inundation of the Nile also has to do with a woman's bleeding. They understood human sexuality and biology. They didn't hide it from their children. They taught it to children. They taught correct sex ed to their children. They didn't cover it up as if it were some taboo issue that would cause them to sin if they dared talk about it. Everybody knew and understand who they were as their identity. And so there is no reason for the listing of Mitzrayim as a son of Chem, because the Jews and rabbis, they have no clue what that word is. They just assume it must be Egypt, because there's nothing else to be Egypt. No, there is Ham. Ham is Egypt. So get rid of Mitzrayim. The author in the Roman period made it up to justify having somebody over the land of Egypt. But it was Ham. He's the one in charge. He ain't dead yet. And so Japheth is Hehu. He's a water god as well for the flood. And so those are the corresponders to the biblical characters. And I think we're done with this. Although Ham, I should point out, has heavens with a scepter coming down from it. If you're unfamiliar with Jupiter, because you didn't watch those videos where I explain it, Jupiter is symbolized by a lightning bolt. Zeus, lightning bolt. Zeus and Yah, the Hebrew god, are the same character because they're pictorially the same. Us is the Greek masculine singular ending, so remove that, and Zah, Yah, and Yah is actually Zah in Paleo-Hebrew. Same deity, same character. And it's symbolized by a lightning bolt. And so there you have it, scepter with lightning. So we take you to section 85 as we're waiting for this. And it shall come to pass that I, the Lord God, will send one mighty and strong, holding the scepter of power in his hand. And then you see in verse 8, fall by the shaft of death, like as a tree that is smitten by the vivid shaft of lightning. So scepter and lightning are tied together to Jupiter, Zeus, Yah, the last days Mormon capstone Christ. And it's not an assassination. Don't be that stupid. Okay, so we're done with all things Ammon and Ogdode. Okay. It didn't even ask me if I wanted to close all 3 tabs. I'm supposed to ask. And so, by needing to do that, we then need to go into after the flood. I already told it to you here, and so let's get to Abraham chapter 1 and 2. It's technically just Abraham chapter 1. And so Abraham wants to be a high priest of Ammon. And apologists screw this up by saying the god Mamacra, the god Libnah, the god Elkanah, the god Korash, the god Pharaoh. Seriously, did you guys not graduate from high school? Did you not take English grammar? It's the god of Elkanah, the god of Libnah, the god of Mamacra, the god of Korash, the god of Pharaoh. So you guys get it right that Sebek, the alligator crocodile, is the god of Pharaoh. But then you screw it up by saying, well, El is the Canaanite word for God. So it's not the god of Elkanah, it's the god Elkanah, because God is El. You just want to scream. So it's the 5 sons of Horus, if you actually see where they are compared to. And those names are already known, and I'm not going to go over them here. But they're the 5 sons, or the 4 sons of Horus. Elkanah, Libnah, Mamacra, Korash, each associated with a different god of the sons of Horus. Not complicated, but they screw it up and make the church look like they're dumb and that they don't know Egyptian. And Egyptologists just mock and laugh at them and say, yeah, we knew Joseph Smith wasn't a translator. Alright, so let's see, it's custom, 3 virgins. We need to get to where they talk about the history of Egypt. Okay, verse 20. So after Noah, as it was with Noah, so shall it be with thee. Through thy ministry, my name shall be known in the earth forever, for I am God, thy God. So this is the Abrahamic Covenant with the 5 that is today and tomorrow, and technically extended into the 16th, but I don't have that long. But anyway, behold, Potiphar's hill was in the land of of Chaldea. No, not Babylon. Abraham's facsimile number 1, figure number 10, which is confirmed in facsimile number 3, Abraham in Egypt. This is Egypt. Don't put Babylon here. Apologists put Babylon, or they put Sumer, or whatever you want to pronounce it as. No, it's not Mesopotamia. Abraham did not come out of Mesopotamia. The Bible author in the Roman period, who had assimilated into Babylon, changed it that way. It's wrong. It's Abraham from Egypt. And once you put Egypt in place of all the Babylonianisms that you remove from the text, all of a sudden you see the Egyptian stories in Egypt. And the Lord broke down the altar of Elkanah. So it's not the God's altar, it's the high priest's altar. And of the gods of the land. Oh! So the high priest and the gods of the land. Gee, they separated them. Go figure. Joseph Smith knew what he was talking about. And utterly destroyed them. And smote the priest that he died. And there was a great mourning in Chaldea. And so this is why it's an Egyptian priest with Egyptian documents, not in Mesopotamia. It's not complicated. Don't screw it up. But they screw it up, and they lead everybody astray and down dark paths of misinformation and get the church in trouble. In the court of Pharaoh, which, good for you, Joseph, which Pharaoh signifies king by royal blood. Originally, pharaohs were understood as kings before being known as pharaohs, which is a theocracy, high priest king. But royal blood, this is taken from the Heliopolis creation glyph of Nut and Geb being separated by Shu, their father. And I went over the first creation story with Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 being together, not separated, as all scholars wrongly conclude. And so the blood that they're referring to is family blood. So when the prince of Egypt is now to be the king of Egypt, there is a coronation ceremony as well as a wedding ceremony. The wedding supper feast at the temple of the Lamb, becoming the king over Mormons. On April 2024, in the true Zion, not here at Salt Lake City Temple Square, which is where the Great and Abominable Church has already determined it will be. But nobody believes, and everybody are just looky-loos. Oh yeah, Travis, he's crazy. He's talking about stuff that isn't going to happen because the church is true. And then we'll start polygamy with underage child brides for the creepy old prophets, which is most likely going to be oaks. And then we'll be put in bondage and slavery, because that's Zion. Peaceful happiness for all eternity, under Satan's law of happiness, or Satan's plan of happiness, taking away agency. So you're wrong, Travis. You don't know what you're talking about. And so, verse 21, now this king of Egypt was a descendant from the loins, seed of Ham, and was a partaker of the blood of the Canaanites by birth. Zawi Hawass was furious. He demanded the scientists deny science and change the results of the DNA of the pharaohs that were tested, because they came from Canaan. How did Joseph know? And so, where did Canaan get his possession? Yeah, the land of Canaan, where Canaan was the king of Canaan, the kingdom of Canaan. So technically it's Canaa, and the N being a suffix determinative for king, or land if it's Canaan as the land. But so here you have that story of Ham seeing Noah naked, but Canaan getting cursed. So we're starting to figure out what might be going on here, as Joseph is talking about the Canaanites are the royal bloodline of the Pharaohs from Ham. Okay? From this descent sprang all the Egyptians. And thus the blood of the Canaanites was preserved in the land. And so Canaan, in order to preserve the blood of Canaan, had to be married to his sister, just like Geb and Nut. See where we're going with this? Joseph Smith knew. It's amazing. And you didn't get it talked about in your Sunday school lesson, which is of vital importance to your eternal salvation. And the church just ignored it. It's because they didn't know, because they don't believe Joseph is a translator. The land of Egypt being first discovered by a woman. Guess what her name is? And yes, the Egyptian or the Latin version is used here, but everybody just completely dismisses it so that they can show that Joseph Smith was wrong, and yet he's 100% correct. Who was the daughter of Ham. And the daughter of Egyptus. So the daughter of Ham and Egyptus discovers the land of Egypt and calls it Egypt, as the wife of Chem is Kemet, which is Egypt. Ta-da! Joseph Smith is a translator, and the church says no. Who are you going to believe? Mr. Chief Cornerstone of the Cornerstone, and let God prevail, or Joseph Smith? Dear God. And so her name is also Egyptus, as we find out further in the text. But when this woman discovered the land, it was underwater. Yeah, creation story. Inundation. Ta-da! Heliopolis creation glyph. Who afterwards settled her sons in it, and thus from Ham sprang the race that was preserved the curse in the land. Now the first government of Egypt was established by Pharaoh, the eldest son of Egyptus, the daughter of Ham, and the daughter of Egyptus. So Egyptus married Canaan and gave birth to the first Pharaoh of Egypt. Ta-da! And it's not Narmer or Nimrod in the Bible's text. That's much later in Egyptian history. Again, don't trust the Bible as a literal history. You're going to get screwed up. And even Egyptologists are ashamed to go beyond the Scorpion King, and they just classify it as a zero dynasty, and ignore the Palermo Stela that has the King's List that goes way back into the future, or into the past, into the future. And they just, nope. And it's because the dates for their lives or reigns is way too long. Well, before the flood, what do you know? The Bible gives dates of the people much longer than normal. But Egypt doesn't want to acknowledge it, and so Assyrianologists come out and say, well, the Epic of Gilgamesh is where the Bible got its information from, because they have people before the flood that had long extended lifespans. And so Egyptologists purposely cow to the Assyriologists when Assyriology all comes from Egypt, all of it. And so even the tower, which we're going to get to here next, is involved in that. And so this is information that you got skipped, but should cover with Abraham 1, which is this Sunday, the 13th. So you see how they screwed it up, because they don't know and don't trust Joseph. And so, alright, let's go back and talk about the tower and correct that information for you. Whoops. Alright, so then the generations of the sons. There's Mitzrayim. No, throw them out. So, yeah, the genealogy is incorrect. And you notice how Ammon is in Mesopotamia? The god of the Egyptians is in Mesopotamia. Sure. Alright, so chapter 11. The earth was one language and of one speech. Egyptian. And it came to pass that they journeyed from the east. Really? No. And Shinar, which is Assyria, the Mesopotamia. And so no. And interestingly, it's also corresponding to Osiris, Asher. But this particular one is Shinar rather than Asher for Assyria. And then they talk about the earlier attempts to make pyramids in Egypt with mud brick, the mastabas, the pre-pyramids, which were, the mastabas were used as burial chambers, which is why there have been many originally who assumed that the pyramids were for burial chambers, but there's a problem, no burials in the pyramids. And so they then assume, well, they weren't burials then. No, they were in symbol form, taken from the mastabas. But again, they abandoned their Egyptian as Egyptologists. Just so frustrating. If you don't want to trust Egyptian, don't become an Egyptologist. Because it seems more like you want to become an Egyptologist to destroy the whole field of Egyptology. Get out. You don't belong here then. Just like Christians entering all fields of science so that they can destroy science and put forth their Christian nonsense in place of it. And so the concept that it's from Assyria is that the Assyrians into the Babylonian period with the Temple of Marduk in Ur of Babylon in 600 BCE, not before. were all mud brick pyramids, or ziggurats, as they were called. And so they were layered with smaller sections getting up to the capstone, versus the pyramids, which were a straight upward climb, except the mastabas weren't. They were the step, like the ziggurats of Mesopotamia. And so you can see the period when the Assyrians migrated out from Egypt. It was after the mastaba period of the Egyptians. And no, it wasn't in the 3000 BCE period. It was much, much, much earlier. Daniel Jackson of Stargate was correct, even though he didn't quite know his Egyptian, as they made him appear to know. He at least got the comment on Budge correct. Nonetheless, my favorite show. And so, let us build a city and a tower, whose top may reach unto heaven. Yeah, they're talking about ziggurats and pyramids here. Let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the earth. And so Bruce R. McConkie assumes this connection, though in the beginning of the Book of Mormon, I think it does talk about that, maybe, unless it's the introduction written by the Smiths. But the text of Ether itself has no Babel in it. Babel, as indicated here, is Lebanon. The reason why it's Lebanon is because this is an Egyptian document. And this is the land of Canaan. Babel is in Canaan. That troublemaker who had sex with his sister and is therefore cursed by Noah. From the Egyptian story about Nut and Geb. Atum tells Shu, his son, separate your kids. They're a little too frisky. And so he then goes and separates them, but they still have children thanks to King David. Thoth. And so all of Egypt follows that pattern from the origin story of all of Egypt. Alright, so then you have Lebanon. Now, the reason why Lebanon is because of Osiris's first death, in which Set nailed him in a coffin at the big party and the contest to see who could fit in the coffin, and it only fit Osiris. Nailed him shut, 9-inch nails, set it afloat down the Nile River. And then down meant north, because the mountains flood the Nile northward into the delta, because it's a D shape as it goes into the Mediterranean. And sailed all the way up to Lebanon, where it beached there, and a cedar of Lebanon grew in its location. And the king of Babel, his name was Babylon, and being the suffix determinative, so Babylon, the king of Babylon, not the Mesopotamian Babylon. Carved that cedar tree, which were big, massive trees, similar to the oak and redwoods of Northern California, where the Planet of the Apes took place. And so Ezekiel then has a parable in chapter 17, about an eagle going to the cedars of Lebanon, taking from the lofty branches a twig and bringing it to a land with the symbol of an eagle, where there are similar trees like the cedars of Lebanon, and plants him there. It's not Nazareth or Bethlehem, is it? And so that's where Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel and others talk about the branch of the latter days, the man like Moses, whom Joseph Smith said will be a Mormon who is the capstone of Mormonism. After Osiris, Joseph Smith is murdered by his brother Set, who ordered the murder. It was Willard Richards technically, but ordered by Brigham and Heber to assassinate Joseph so that they can usurp his church. As Brigham already set it up in England, all the converts thought the name of the church was the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And so when Brigham took over, that was the official name now. And guess where the saints from Europe came to? Oh, well, the Church of Christ of Sidney Rigdon, that's not the name. Not going there. The reorganized church that was after we came, Brigham Young planned this whole con and got in trouble with the United States, and the United States shut them down. 1887, the year John Taylor died. So this is the story the church will not tell you. I wonder why. Why? And so we're in the lesson, aren't we? In chapter 11. And so, the tower, I just explained it to you. It's about the latter-day Christ of Mormons. Because even though this is referring to the pyramid building and the migration throughout the world from Egypt, it's also about the latter-day Christ. Talking about Babel as the location. And so, even in the Egyptian story, Isis, his wife of Osiris, sends out missionaries to recover the body of Osiris from Babel, Lebanon, Beirut, Lebanon, brings it back to Egypt. So scattered Osiris, gathered back to Egypt. You see how that's done? Scattering, gathering of Israel? Well, the scattering, gathering of the 12 tribes of Israel is the second death story, which is not here yet. Because Abraham starts off the generations for Jacob to usurp the birthright blessing from Esau and the 12 sons of Jacob. Joseph, being the birthright blessing son, gets a double portion, Ephraim and Manasseh. So 13 male tribes, and he had one daughter. Jacob had one daughter, Dinah, who was raped by the Shechemites, but one daughter. And so the story of the second death of Osiris, Set finds out he's alive still, and this time cuts him up, chops him up into 14 pieces for the 14 children of Jacob. Now later on, other Egyptians told the story in which, it's 42 for the 42 districts of Egypt. How the whole of Egypt is divided into the 42 pieces. But the original, stick with the Bible story that uses that version of the 14 pieces. So guess which is the 14th piece that goes missing? Because the missionaries again get sent out by the church, who is the wife of Osiris. They then gather the pieces from the 4 quarters of the earth, which are the sons of Horus, and bring them back to Zion, Heliopolis, where the church magically assembles the body back together. But yeah, a fish or it goes missing, depending on the story. That 14th piece is missing. And there's a difference why women have that egg and men have that other thing sticking out. And it's gone. And so she has to fashion another one. And then depending on which version of the story you're reading from, she either hovers above as a hawk falcon and is immaculately conceived, or she actually gets on top, just like Nut was on top of Geb, and conceives Horus. And Set finds out that she had brought back Osiris's body parts, assembled his body, and got pregnant with him. And so Set now realizes there's a threat to its throne. So he seeks to kill her and her fetus. And so she is chased into the wilderness. Revelation chapter 12. And so the conception is the sign in the heavens of Isis, that's the falcon hawk, hovering over the body, immaculately conceived through that process. That's where all that came from. It's a sign in the heavens, it's a star date, 23rd September 2017. It's apocalyptic literature. It's not meant to be literal history. This did not really happen in history. These are all stories of the Egyptians talking about the latter days, because of Horus, that they knew at the beginning of the latter days, the first year, Horus, who comes back to restore the kingdom, will lose his right eye, which is the right eye of Horus, which symbolizes the sun, which also symbolizes government. And so the first year, you're looking for a star date of a total solar eclipse on the new year of the ancient Egyptian religious calendar. Can you guess, from having not watched my videos, no cheating, what date that was in all of history? And we're talking way before 4000 BCE. We're talking way before 10,500 BC, where scientists have confirmed throughout the world that there was a universal flood, a worldwide flood in 10,500 BCE. That's how old this story is. The pyramid texts talk about it as if it's already well known to everybody. The pyramid texts are the oldest full document in existence so far. Not the Epic of Gilgamesh. So yes, the pyramids were built around 12,000 BCE. We know this. It's confirmed through multiple fields of science, independently. And so, yeah. So the sacrament, because you're not going to church, right? So you have to remember when you did go to church, they had the sacrament, the broken bread for the body of Christ that was broken for us. Yeah, that's Osiris. And so the Mormons are all gathered at the chapel, having been converted from the four quarters of the earth, brought back to Zion April 2024, the third day of darkness. The church doesn't want you to know this because they're not going to fulfill it. They're the great and abominable church. They've got their own plans. And so, yes, the blood and body, the broken body of Osiris, as Mormons who are temple endowed with the initiatories of washing and anointing to become kings and high priests, high priestesses and queens of the order of Amen, to take upon yourselves now the name of Christ, which is Amen, so that the Mormon to be born from the great and abominable church to restore Joseph Smith's church would be from parents who have been initiated in the temple of the great and abominable church. Joseph Smith knew all this, and the current church doesn't want you to know any of it because they don't believe it or don't want to believe it. But nonetheless, they're on guard, watching just in case, so they can murder them, and that all Mormons will be subjected to the great and abominable church for all eternity. Lucifer not being bound, but becoming the eternal king, having conquered Horus. So, which side are you a part of, Mormons? Joseph's or the current church who murdered him? And so you internalize the body and blood of Osiris, just as Isis, the church wife of Osiris, immaculately conceived for the latter days of 23rd September 2017, right after the first year of the battle, 21st of August 2017. This is all over America. It's the land of America. Not Jerusalem, not Egypt. Egyptians knew this. Because in order to know when a solar eclipse would occur, you also would have to know where it will occur. And so Ezekiel, talking about an eagle carrying a cedar of Lebanon twig to where? America. Where? Yeah, to San Francisco area and Oakland. These are the checklists that you're supposed to be making for the last days Mormon Messiah, the Christ, who is immortal, who can be murdered, and all things will be wasted at his coming, and you guys will be subjected to the great and abominable church, unless Putin has anything to say about that. Joseph Smith says he does. Section 101. So do you see how the church is purposely covering up our religion from us? And so, let's get on to Abraham. You got to get into it's 12 to 17, it says. And so, yeah, it starts off Abraham, and the Abraham account corrects that it's in Egypt, not in Mesopotamia. And the original homeland, the promised land, is Canaan. Technically all of Egypt, but blood of the Canaanites. Canaan for Israel. And it's America, technically. southern Illinois, which is why Joseph Smith said that this is where Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden was, because it has to do with the latter days. It had nothing to do with the true history of things, which everybody misunderstood and carries it on as Samantha Bee on Full Frontal, therefore made fun of that belief of Mormons. I did the video for you when the next day after she did that, talked about that. And so then talking about separating from Lot. Lot plays a part in this because Abraham will give tribute to Pharaoh, who is Melchizedek, the great king and high priest of Ammon. That's the Egyptian Pharaoh. It's not a separate person who's running a coup government and religion when Egypt rules the land. That's what people have been creating as a result, to fit their biases into the real history of the world and to alter the text interpretation. So when he saves his brother from the king who kidnapped him and held him hostage, he was giving tribute from the spoils of that king to the rightful king over the whole land. And so Abraham technically was also condemning or punishing the king, the tributary king of Egypt, and so Pharaoh approved as Abraham gave tribute to him, not tithes. Alright, and so then this, thou art my sister, and it's not a lie, because that goes again, the Heliopolis creation glyph. Brother and sisters, secure the blood of the Canaanites. That's all Abraham is doing. So he's doing the pharaonic thing with his queen wife to give birth to the usurped Horus, not Pharaoh. It's now going to be through Abram, who becomes Abraham. And I did the name difference, the new name. I'm pretty sure I did that for you. The addition of the H having to do with the flail of Pharaoh. Also the sky. And so he's the father of the sky, which is Shu, who separates his son and daughter from each other from having sex, but doesn't work. King David saves the day, and they're born, and then Cain slays Abel. Set slays Osiris. And so the author says Abraham can't provide Sarah with a child. And so after this pharaonic thing, then you have Lot, and the story of Lot getting captured, and then all of a sudden you get these messengers coming and saying, hey, baby's coming. Wait a minute. So they go to Pharaoh. Pharaoh kidnaps and holds Sarah hostage in his harem, and the author says they didn't have sex? Or she didn't have a baby? As Abraham could not provide her a baby, as they're old now. You sure you want to reword the story maybe to fit a better narrative that may be uncomfortable for you to talk about? So yeah, then you have Ishmael. Let's see, that's Amorites. Yeah, in verse 18 of chapter 15, in the same day the Lord made a covenant with Abraham, saying, unto thy seed I have given this land, from the Nile River. And scholars don't want to claim the Nile River. They want to say, well, it's a wadi in between Israel and Egypt. No, the river of Egypt is the Nile. Don't sell yourself short. And to the great river, the river Euphrates. Oh, the whole land of Ham. Kemet, Egypt. That is Abraham's land. He's Egyptian. That's his land. That's the promise. That's the blessing. The author's selling them short. Okay, and so Hagar becomes the wife of Ishmael, and she's an Egyptian. Because all of the wives of Pharaoh get handmaid slaves. Alright. And so Ishmael is denied the birthright blessing status. And so the child of Pharaoh and Sarah is Isaac. Laughter, mocking laughter, which is promised by the messengers, who then go off to Sodom to warn Lot, you need to leave, and the wife refuses to leave Utah, Salt Lake City, and turns into a pillar of the Great Salt Lake. So all of these are apocalyptic literature, guys. And then there's the 50 and 45 thing. I did the video and nobody thought that was funny. But apparently there are more people watching my videos than will allow me to know is watching, because of the way YouTube has changed things. I remember in 2014 when I first caught on that, hey, I watch my own video and it counts as a view, and I'm not signed in. Huh. I watch it again. Oh, another view is counted. And again. Oh, okay. Cool. Well, I don't have enough time to watch it that many times to rack up so many views. So I didn't worry about that. Wasn't worried about being popular. But nonetheless, I tried it some months later, and oh, it doesn't count anymore. This is when bots started coming around, because they caught on too. Oh, you can have bots that can be automatically programmed to rapidly watch the videos and rack up views, and we can get paid big bucks from YouTube. So YouTube finally caught on to that and shut that system down. That's why they do the partner program now. It's all crap. Ruined YouTube, just like MTV ruined music videos. They used to be about music videos, music TV, but nope, it's now interviews and things unrelated to music. So they just lost their audience. Alright, so there's the Lot story. Oh, nope. We're done. This is 17 and 18. So yeah, that's the week after is the messengers telling Abraham she's now pregnant. So they're purposely separating the stories for you too. But they aren't real history. She didn't have sex with Pharaoh in reality. It's all symbolism of the Great and Abominable Church, and the Mormon comes out of the Great and Abominable Church to restore the original church. And so the names are purposely named for that purpose. Sarah is Prince, and as she's a female, it's Princess. And so she's the princess of the sky, and thus is married to the prince, and he becomes the father. Alright, so it's not Ham, it's a different H in Hebrew, Paleo-Hebrew. from Ham. So it's not Abraham. Don't be fooled into that. It's English that screws us up on that. Hides the original Hebrew from us. Alrighty. So that's it. We're done. Hour and 15 minutes. So again, overtime for church.